Welcome back, YouTubers. In this Java tutorial, I want to talk about variables, specifically the different parts that make up initializing a variable, how to set the value of a variable, and how to recall the data or value stored within a variable at a later point in time. So our previous Java tutorial was writing the Hello World example program. We're going to continue on with this one and use it for this tutorial as well in episode 3. So the first thing I should say, well, I guess let's just write a variable and I'll talk about it afterwards. We'll call it variable 1. So every line of Java code ends with a semicolon, which is why there's a semicolon here and a semicolon there. These two lines of code are basically two lines of Java code. They don't have to be actual lines, though. If I were to compile and run this program, this would run the exact same way that this would. That's important to note. The only reason why we make it two separate lines is so that it's just easier to read as a human. And actually, if you make it as the same line and then save the file, Eclipse, I really thought Eclipse was automatically going to put that on the next line. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Anyway, so what happens, so this is basically how the standard way of how you define a variable. You have to declare the variable type and then the variable name itself. And we can put whatever combination of letters in here that we want. The only thing we cannot put in there is a space, because a space means that this, our naming of the variable is done. And then there is an optional third part, and that is how you set the value of a variable. In Java, the way you do this is there's actually two different ways. You can declare the variable and then set the variable value to be equal to whatever you want, followed by a semicolon. Or you can do it all at once, like so. And so what you're looking at now is line 6 and 7 will basically set the value of variable 1 to be equal to 5, and they're for the most part equivalent. What you cannot do is, if you did not have line 6, for example, you cannot just say variable 1 equals 5, because it has not been defined yet. The compiler does not know what variable 1 is, or specifically what type variable 1 is. So you have to do that with this, the first part, which is the type definition. Notice how Eclipse highlights it and recognizes that I want to define an integer, or int for integer, variable. There are other variable types. Integers are used, the integer variable basically can store a whole number. You can use a double type, and these can be used to store whole numbers as well, but they can also be used to store decimals. And they're primarily used to store decimals because, for example, if I come back up here and I try to make this a decimal, you'll see that the compiler yells at me with that red squiggly line, and my program will no longer run because there's errors in it. You can also, Java knows just by default what a string is, and a string is a series of characters. And the series of characters needs to be surrounded by quotes marks to show the beginning and ending of the string. What other types are there? Yes, there's the character. I'll call it CH for short. And this is a single character, so for example, any key that you can hit basically with the keyboard, obviously not the F1 through F12 keys, for example, but any standard letter key or number key. So we could say S, or this could be 7, can be a number 2, or a number as well. We'll make it C for character. So that is how you define a variable, and we've covered the different types you can have for basically Java variables. The way you recall and use them later is, so for example, if I wanted to print out, okay, let's back up a step and talk about what's actually happening in memory when you define a variable. So when I type int variable1 equals 55, what that's doing is in the computer's memory, the computer is reserving a location to store the number 55. Similarly, down here, there is another spot in memory that's referenced by this name, double variable 1, that is going to store whatever value you tell it to store. Same thing for the variable string, same thing for the variable ch. I can change the value of the location, and so like up here of the value of the variable by doing variable name equals new value, as long as the new value that I'm assigning to the variable is of the correct type. So down here, for example, I could say ch is equal to the letter K. Or I could say string is equal to Brave New World. And I don't have to redeclare the variable by saying, for example, string in front of it. And actually, that will generate an error because, as Eclipse will tell you, this is a duplicate variable. You've already named a variable the name string, and so you don't want to create a second spot in memory that has the exact same name, because then when you try to reference it with the variable name later, the compiler won't know which memory location you're talking about, and so the compiler just prevents you from doing that. Okay, so that's how you declare a variable and set the data value of the variable, or the data within the variable. How do you recall the value stored within a variable? Well, that's pretty easy. So, for example, if we want to just print out a variable to the console the same way that we did our system.out.println of hello world, where whatever was in between those parentheses gets displayed to the console, same thing holds true here as well. So let's first print out a string to say what we're going to display. So we're going to display variable 1, and then we're going to add a plus and print out variable 1. Okay, so a couple of things are happening here. This is just a string, so this will actually just straight appear to the console the exact same way I typed it. And I actually need a space to be there as well, so that there's a space in between this word and whatever this thing is. This plus sign, what that's actually saying is basically take this string value and add to the end of it the value of whatever comes after the plus. And in this case I typed variable 1, which is a reference to our variable that we declared up here. So when I run this program, what we will see is variable 1, let's actually just put in equals there too, so we'll see variable 1 equals the value that is currently stored in variable 1. In this case, the value was originally 55. We rewrote or overwrote that value with the value of 5, so we will see variable 1 equals to 5. If we click the run button, sure enough, that's what we see. And you can actually replace this with anything that we've defined here, so we could say double variable 1, our double variable that we used, run it, and sure enough we see the value that we set to that variable. We can print out our string variable, and we'll see the value series of characters. Yep. Oh, nope, I lied. Remember, we reset the string variable to be Brave New World down here. So at this point in time in our program, we will the string variable currently has this value in it, and that's because this value overwrote the previous value. So we can also do our character variable, ch, and it initially was C, and now became K, so we should see the letter K. Sure enough, we do. If we make this line a comment or put 2 slashes in front of it, that basically tells the compiler, ignore whatever comes after these 2 slashes for this line for only line 12. So that's basically telling the compiler, completely ignore this line, it doesn't exist. Which means that the variable ch never gets overwritten with the value k, and so now when we run the program we should see the letter C. Sure enough, we do. And that's pretty much all there is to variables. Just to show you kind of how these would be useful, let's create a quick example here. Let's create a variable called num1. We'll set it to be 3. Make another variable called num2. Set it to be, say, 9. And then let's create the last variable called sum, and what we want to do is see the sum of num1 plus num2, semicolon, and let's print out the result of that addition. So we'll just print out that variable. So now when we run this, what we should see is the value that is currently in the variable sum, and we have set the value within sum to be the value currently in num1 plus the value in num2, which is 12. So at the end of our program, we should see that the result is equal to 12. Click the run button, and sure enough, that's what we see. So that's pretty much what you can do with variables. The things, just to recap real quickly, there are 3 primary parts of the variable. There is the type of the variable that you're declaring. Then there is the actual name of the variable that you will use as a reference to reference that variable from then on in your software. And then optionally, you can set the value of any variable with the equal sign. And that's pretty much all you need to know about variables. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section below.